My video cut out, but I was talking about Handmaid's Tale. Oh, hang on. Okay. So I was just talking about Handmaid's Tale. And I think I left off where I was talking about, and I'm not going to talk about these too much because they're so popular right now. And also there's a show, which again, I have not watched yet. I intentionally wanted to read the books first. But I definitely will watch it now. But basically, yeah, so our main character in this is a handmaid. And she basically is secretly documenting her experiences and information about like just existing in Gilead at this time. And so, um, yeah, and so she's like secretly writing, like, and well, not quite writing yet, but she basically is like writing in her head and trying to like memorize these. And like later, we're kind of told how she documents, but yeah, so a handmaid's job in this world is to literally bear children. And like that's their only job. And they are simultaneously viewed as like um I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but basically like sluts, right? They're like, oh, sluts, like they could have chosen to do any job between being like a wife or a Martha, which is like a maid or a cook. And they chose instead to be a handmaid. So like, oh, but also they're not allowed to like out loud say that they're sluts because sluts, right? We know that's not really what's happening. I'm not calling them sluts. I'm saying other women in the book are calling them sluts, right? So basically, they're looked down upon, but outwardly, people aren't allowed to look down upon them because they're giving them the gift of children. So, a lot of times in this story, if a commander, which is a man with a high power job, if a commander and his wife are unable to produce a child, they're given a handmaid. Okay? And sometimes these commanders are given several handmaids and several wives and still cannot produce a child. So it sounds like it might be his fertility that's the problem. However, that simply does not exist in this world. That sounds familiar. So yeah, and basically the hard thing about this book is like they talk about how even the way that um the sex is basically done like during ovulation is meant to be a ceremony, which isn't just the handmaid and like the commander, like the wife's involved too. And like and even in the birth, the wife who is not physically birthing becomes involved, and the baby's immediately handed like to the wife, away, like taken from the handmaid. And oh my goodness, there's so many things. But I will say, so a couple things I love about this book and this just there's so many things about Margaret Atwood that I appreciate for doing the way she did in this book and in this world that she's written about. And one thing for me is that one, she didn't write about anything that hadn't happened yet because she didn't want people to say like, oh, that could never happen, right? So everything in this book has already happened. It may not have happened in the United States, or it may have just in a different, in a previous time period. But everything had happened already. And everything in the book was written with technology that had already existed during the time the book was written, because her whole point, again, was don't say it can't happen. And a lot of the abuse of religious imagery and things like that, we are very familiar anytime a regime takes over and wants to misuse religion to basically exploit people and take power over entire countries. So yeah, so it's not unfamiliar to anybody really. And I think one thing that this book did was the way it wrote about like small forms of taking back your power, right? And that's something that I really appreciate, because it's so easy, I think, to look at the women in this book and be like, oh, they're suffering so much. And they are, don't get me wrong. But it's so easy to be like, oh, all I see is suffering. But that's not what Atwood highlights. And there's so many examples of like quiet taking back power, quiet protests that I really love. Like for example, one thing was like the guys like guarding the gates that she has to walk through with another handmaid to go get groceries, right? They have to walk through these gates. And men are not allowed to touch them because that's basically touching a higher up man's property, right? Super messed up. But anyway, so she knows that these men guarding the gate are not allowed to touch her or whatever. And so as she walks by, she like can, you know how as a woman you can like sense when a man's like looking at you walk, you know? She like senses that, and she's like, you know, I may have strutted a little bit. Because and she says like I liked the fact that he looked at me and could not have me. And that serves him right because you know, if men are benefiting from this world so much at the expense of women, yeah, this is like my small victory that you can't have me and you want me. And I was like, yeah. And like little things like how she'll hide butter to use as like moisturizer for her skin. Like those little things seem so small, but they're actually so big because they're acts of defiance that give her back autonomy and power, right? Okay. And then we get to the Testaments. I'm going to cover this up because it has my library information. So the Testaments takes place 15 years, I almost said 15 minutes, 15 years after Handmaid's Tale, okay? And it's written differently than the Handmaid's Tale because in the Handmaid's Tale, it's just the experience of the single handmaid. In the Testaments, it is three different narrators, three different characters, like separately that were interchanging between, and eventually all three characters' narratives intertwine. And so those three people are, one is an aunt, and at first she doesn't reveal her identity, but you kind of start to pick it up. You have some theories, right? And might be a character from The Handmaid's Tale. Later she does identify herself, but until she does, as you're reading, it's kind of fun to make your predictions. And then the other character is a teenager raised in Canada, so adjacent to Gilead geographically. And so her world is very different than the teenage girls just across the border. And we learn that a lot of women, if they're able to, are smuggled out into Canada where she lives. We see a lot more in this book of how other countries interact with Gilead or choose not to. We see how other people are concerned about the human rights violations taking place in Gilead. We get more of an outside perspective that I think is very fascinating. Also, through the aunt's perspective, we get more information about, well, why did women choose to become these aunts in power? Like, what did they gain from it? How did they even prove that they're worth being an aunt, right? Like, what did they experience that put them in this place that they are now? And the third character is a girl who was born in Gilead, right? Once it was already Gilead. So not during the transition, not during the fall of what we knew in the book as the United States, but it had already been like she was born in the established Gilead, right? And she becomes a teenager and she's about to potentially be married, and it's her experiences with that. And we get to see more about society within Gilead through that third girl's experiences, because we kind of see how, depending on the class you're born into, you'll attend different schools because your expectations of the roles you'll fill as an adult are different, right? So we see some of that system at play. We learn more about like how spouses are chosen because the women cannot choose their husbands. And it's not as simple as just a man going, that one. Do the men have more say? 100% yes. But do they get to officially like make that decision? No. And in fact, the people who do the matchmaking can actually even override the fathers of the brides when it comes to the matches. So that's very fascinating as well. And anyway, so these, because I kind of went off a little bit, but these three narratives are taking place at the same time in the story, but these three characters are separate, and over time they end up not separate and somehow interacting together. And that's really cool. One thing that I appreciate about both texts, this might be a spoiler, but I'm going to say it because I think that it is one of the most important things, and one of the things I like the most is that at the end of both texts, it cuts to like many years in the future, and there's professors talking about transcripts and audio tapes and artifacts that were found in what we know is no longer Gilead. So while it doesn't take place in these books, we know that at some point way in the future, Gilead has fallen. And so that gives us hope for not maybe not the women who experience, definitely not these initial women, but probably not for the women we read about in the Testaments, but for future generations, it gives us hope for them because we know that they're not in this um, this state of living, right? We know that there's something a lot better for them because Gilead no longer exists. And we know that because these professors are discussing artifacts found at like these conferences where they're discussing like Gilead studies. Um, yeah, and they're talking about it all like these artifacts are so old, so here are the difficulties in verifying it. Here's why we think these sources are trusted. And so that goes to show like it's been fallen a long time, and that's really powerful to me because all of these experiences, right, the little protest of like sneaking pads of butter to use as moisturizer for your skin, the little protest of like there are some actual big protests in this on the side of Canada, right, but like I mean the small acts of protest when it comes to um, maybe like not smiling when you're expected to smile at someone, like those little things were big things, and they were big things in the moment, but it those women are remembered as powerful, and the women who came after them have a better life because of those small things all adding up together, and I think that's really awesome. So definitely recommend both books. The Handmaid's Tale is meant to be read prior to the Testaments, and yeah, I definitely recommend reading both of them. Um, and I'm gonna watch the show. So yeah.